That soda did not just ruin my papers, Naomi Carter said softly. It just became evidence. The cola hit her case file before the midnight coffee finished dripping. Brown liquid spread across the white pages, carrying ice and sugar over witness notes, court dates, and the neat black ink of a woman who had spent her whole life learning how to stay calm when the room tried to make her smaller. One ice cube rolled off the counter and clicked across the checkerboard tile at Miller's diner. The sound was tiny, almost harmless, but every person in the room heard it. The cook stopped turning hash browns on the griddle. A trucker in booth 3 lowered his fork. Ruth Miller froze behind the register with a towel in one hand and a coffee pot in the other. At the far end of the counter, 17-year-old Malik Johnson stood with his backpack half open, his fingers still curled around the zipper because Officer Caleb Turner had ordered him to empty it in front of everyone. Caleb stood over Naomi with one hand resting near his belt and the empty plastic cup tilted in the other, his face hard with the confidence of a man who had been feared too long to remember the difference between authority and permission. "This town does not need another loud outsider telling cops how to do their jobs," he said. Naomi looked down at the wet file, then at the badge shining on his uniform beneath the fluorescent diner lights. She did not stand. She did not raise her voice. She did not give him the satisfaction of seeing her scramble for dignity he had failed to take. "Then tomorrow morning," she said, placing one steady hand on the soaked pages, "you can explain that to the new district attorney." For one breath, nobody moved. Even the old neon sign in the window seemed to buzz more quietly. Caleb blinked once, then let out a short laugh that sounded less certain than he intended. "Lady, I do not know who you think you are." Naomi lifted her eyes to him. They were calm, dark, and tired in a way that did not come from the hour. "That is the first true thing you have said tonight." Malik stared at her, still holding his backpack. Ruth's mouth parted, but no words came out. Outside, rain began to tap against the diner windows, soft Georgia rain that blurred the red and blue reflections from Caleb's patrol car parked at the curb. The whole trouble had started 10 minutes earlier with a missing wallet and a bad assumption. A tourist passing through Marlowe County had complained that his wallet was gone. Caleb had looked around the diner, ignored the 2 men laughing near the jukebox, ignored the booth where the tourist had left his jacket, and fixed his attention on Malik, the only black teenager in the room. Malik had been clearing plates for Ruth after school, earning gas money for a car he did not yet own. The security camera above the pie case had been pointed straight at him, but Caleb had not asked to see it. He had asked for the backpack. Naomi had watched from the counter booth where she had been reading under the yellow pool of a lamp, her black coat folded beside her, her hair pinned back, her face unfamiliar to most of the room after 16 years away. She had not planned to speak. She had wanted one quiet night before the courthouse, one cup of diner coffee in the place where her father used to sit after late shifts at the repair shop, 1 hour to remember the town before trying to serve it. But when Caleb told Malik to stop acting nervous if he had nothing to hide, something in Naomi's chest went still. Not hot. Not wild. Still. The kind of stillness that comes before a decision. "Officer," she had said, "suspicion is not evidence, and a teenager is not a shortcut." That was when Caleb turned toward her. That was when the room learned how quickly a badge could become a wall. He asked whether she was a lawyer with the slow smile of a man expecting her to shrink. Naomi did not answer fast enough for him, so he stepped closer, picked up the cola from the counter beside her file, and poured it as if he were washing away her right to speak. Now the papers lay wet between them, but Naomi sat straighter than before. She reached for a stack of napkins, pressed them carefully over the pages, and looked around the diner. "Everyone in this room saw what happened," she said. "And every camera in this room did too." Caleb's smile faded by a fraction. Ruth finally moved, setting the coffee pot down with a soft glass sound. Malik zipped his backpack without being told. Naomi gathered the damp file, page by page, as if collecting not damage, but proof. Outside, the rain kept falling, and inside Miller's diner, the first night of her return had already become the first test of the justice she had come home to build. Naomi Carter stayed seated until Officer Caleb Turner walked out of Miller's diner. She did not chase him with words. She did not ask him to repeat himself for the room. She did not turn the moment into a performance, because she had learned long ago that power did not always need volume to become permanent. Caleb pushed through the glass door with his hat low and his shoulders stiff, the bell above the entrance giving one thin ring as he stepped into the rain. His patrol car lights washed red and blue across the wet windows, across Malik's frightened face, across the ruined pages in Naomi's hands. Then the engine started, the tires hissed over the puddled street, and the sound faded into the dark road outside. Only then did the diner breathe again. Ruth Miller moved first. She came from behind the counter with a clean towel, her eyes glossy with shame she had not yet found words for. "Honey," she said softly, then stopped herself, as if even kindness needed permission after what had happened. Naomi accepted the towel with a nod. "Thank you, Ruth." The older woman froze at the sound of her name. "You know me?" Naomi looked up, and for the first time that night, a faint shadow of memory crossed her face. "You used to give my father coffee in a paper cup after his late shift at Carter Auto Repair. He always said you were the only person in town who knew how to make coffee strong enough for a tired man." Ruth's hand rose to her mouth. "Elijah Carter's girl?" Naomi nodded. "Yes, ma'am." Something in Ruth's face softened and broke at the same time. Behind them, Malik stood by the counter with his backpack held close against his chest, still not fully believing he was allowed to be left alone. Naomi turned toward him. "Malik, did he touch your bag?" The boy shook his head quickly. "No, ma'am. He told me to open it, but you spoke before I did." "Good," Naomi said. "Did anyone tell you that you were free to leave?" Malik looked toward the door Caleb had used. "No, then you were being detained." The words landed in the diner with quiet weight. A trucker shifted in his booth. The tourist who had lost his wallet looked suddenly interested in his plate. Naomi's gaze moved to him. "Sir, did you check the booth where you were sitting?" The man blinked, embarrassed. I looked around." Ruth turned, walked to booth 5, lifted the tourist's jacket from the seat, and found a brown leather wallet tucked beneath it. She held it up without speaking. The silence that followed was different from the one Caleb had left behind. This one had shape. Proof had a shape. Shame had a shape. Malik's shoulders dropped as if a weight had slid off him and hit the floor where everyone could see it. Naomi reached into her bag and took out a dry legal pad. The top of her case file was stained beyond saving, but the notes inside could be rebuilt. Evidence could be rebuilt. Trust was harder. She wrote the time, the name she knew, the booth numbers, the location of the camera above the pie case, the direction of the patrol car lights, and the exact words she could remember. Her handwriting remained neat. That steadiness came from years in federal courtrooms, years of listening to people lie under oath, years of learning that outrage without structure could be dismissed, while facts, arranged carefully, could make even powerful men sit down. Ruth brought her a fresh cup of coffee and placed it beside the wet file. "Naomi," she whispered, "I should have said something sooner." Naomi looked at the cup, then at the woman who had kept a diner alive through recessions, storms, and a town that often punished people for choosing the wrong side too early. "Then say something now." Ruth nodded once, slowly. Malik looked between them. "Are you really the district attorney?" Naomi did not smile, but her eyes warmed. "I will be sworn in tomorrow morning." The boy swallowed. "Then why did you not just tell him?" Naomi folded the damp towel over the file and pressed it flat. Outside, rain ran down the glass in thin silver lines, blurring the empty street where Caleb's car had been. "Because, Malik," she said, voice low and clear, "a badge should not be the only reason someone decides to respect you." The boy stared at her, absorbing that in a way no classroom lecture could have taught. Naomi gathered her papers and stood, the wet file held close against her coat. The diner smelled of coffee, old grease, rainwater, and the fragile beginning of courage. She had come home to Marlow County after 16 years away, hoping to enter quietly, to study the place before announcing herself. Instead, the place had introduced itself first. At the door, she paused and looked back at Ruth. "Do not erase the camera footage." Ruth straightened. "I will not." Naomi looked at Malik. "Write down everything you remember before you sleep. Not how it felt. What happened? Feelings matter, but facts protect you." Malik nodded, still shaken, but standing taller now. Naomi stepped outside beneath the diner awning. The Georgia rain touched the pavement softly, almost gently, as if the night itself knew not to be loud. She opened her wallet and looked at the small identification card tucked behind her driver's license. Naomi Elise Carter, District Attorney, Marlow County. The plastic caught the red glow of the diner sign and flashed briefly in her palm. Tomorrow, the county would see the title. Tonight, it had already seen the work. Naomi did not drive to a hotel after leaving Miller's Diner. She drove the 3 miles to the small blue house on Briar Lane where she had grown up, the house her mother had refused to sell even after Naomi left Marlow County for college, law school, and courtrooms with marble floors far from Georgia rain. The porch light was still broken, just as she remembered, flickering once before settling into a tired yellow glow. She parked beneath the pecan tree, turned off the engine, and sat for a moment with both hands on the steering wheel. The wet case file lay on the passenger seat, wrapped in Ruth's towel. It smelled faintly of cola, coffee, paper, and the diner's old fryer oil. Evidence rarely arrived clean. Her mother, Denise Carter, opened the front door before Naomi reached the steps. She was 64 now, smaller than memory in her robe and slippers, but her eyes still carried the alertness of a night shift nurse who could hear trouble before it knocked. "You are late," Denise said. Naomi climbed the porch steps with the file under one arm. "I stopped at Miller's." Denise looked at the towel, then at her daughter's face. "Miller's gave you dinner in a towel?" For the first time that night, Naomi almost smiled. "Not exactly." Inside, the house held the same quiet history it always had: lemon cleaner, old wood, family photographs, rain tapping over the kitchen sink, and the soft hum of a refrigerator that had survived more storms than most politicians. Naomi spread the damp pages across the kitchen table while Denise stood beside her without asking too many questions. That was a Carter family skill. Let the truth breathe before touching it. Naomi placed paper towels between the pages, weighed corners down with salt shakers, a coffee mug, and her father's old socket wrench from the drawer. The metal tool was cool and heavy in her palm. Elijah Carter had used it for 30 years at the repair shop, his hands darkened by grease no soap could fully remove, his back aching from work that kept other people moving. He had also used those same hands to straighten Naomi's shoulders before her first high school debate. When they try to make you small, he had told her, stand so straight the truth has room to breathe. She heard him now as clearly as the rain. Denise read the first page that could still be saved. "Turner?" Naomi nodded. Her mother's jaw tightened in a way that made years gather around her mouth. "That man pulled your father over twice in 1 month before you left for Atlanta. Said he matched a description." "Your father was wearing a mechanic's uniform with his name stitched on it." Naomi looked down at the table. "I remember." "No," Denise said softly. "You remembered being angry. He remembered being tired." The sentence moved through the kitchen like cold air under a door. Naomi sat down slowly. Outside, a car passed over wet pavement and disappeared toward town. She thought of Malik's hands gripping his backpack, Ruth's silence finally breaking, Caleb's empty cup tilted over her papers with all the casual certainty of a man who believed consequences were for other people. This was not one bad stop. This was a habit with a uniform. Denise poured tea into 2 mugs and set one near her daughter. "Your swearing-in is at 9. "I know. And what are you going to do when you see him there?" Naomi looked at the drying pages. "My job." Denise studied her. "That is not an answer. It is the only one that will hold up." For a moment, mother and daughter sat in the low kitchen light, surrounded by damp paper and old grief that had never filed a formal complaint. Naomi wanted anger to be useful. It would have been easier if anger could walk into the courthouse, point across the room, and make the truth obey. But she knew better. She had spent years as a federal prosecutor learning that justice required more than being right. It required patience, documentation, witnesses, procedure, and the discipline not to turn power into the very thing you had promised to challenge. Before dawn, Naomi opened her laptop and typed a clean memo from memory: location, time, names, statements, visible camera positions, status of Malik Johnson's detention, recovery of the missing wallet, conduct by Officer Caleb Turner, potential witnesses. She did not embellish. She did not soften. She did not need to. Facts, when placed in the right order, could walk into rooms where emotion was not invited. At 6:30, the rain stopped. Gray morning spread slowly over Briar Lane. Naomi showered, pinned her hair, and put on a black suit that made her look less like someone returning home and more like someone ready to stand inside history without bending. Before leaving, she slipped her district attorney identification into her jacket pocket and placed the dried file, still stained at the edges, into a fresh folder. Denise met her at the front door and adjusted the collar of her coat like Naomi was still 16 and walking into debate finals. "Your father would have wanted to see this," she said. Naomi's eyes softened, but her voice stayed steady. "He will." She stepped onto the porch as sunlight broke through the clouds and touched the wet street. Marlow County was waking up slowly, unaware that the woman it had tried to dismiss at midnight was about to enter the courthouse with a file full of rain, cola, witnesses, and the first test of whether justice in that town could finally learn to stand upright. The Marlow County Courthouse stood at the center of town like a building that had watched too much and confessed too little. Its white columns were streaked from years of rain, its bronze doors rubbed bright where thousands of worried hands had pushed them open, and its flag snapped gently in the clean morning air after the storm. Naomi Carter walked up the front steps at 8:42, holding a fresh folder against her black suit, the stained pages from Miller's Diner sealed inside a clear evidence sleeve. She did not hurry. The courthouse lawn was already filling with county staff, local reporters, attorneys, deputies, and residents who had come to see the swearing-in of the new district attorney. Some knew her name from campaign flyers. Some knew her father's repair shop. Some only knew that a federal prosecutor had come home, and that alone had made certain people uncomfortable before she ever opened her mouth. Inside the main hall, sunlight poured through tall windows and landed across the marble floor in pale rectangles. Voices echoed against the old walls. Shoes clicked. Papers rustled. Somewhere near the security desk, a deputy laughed too loudly, then stopped when Sheriff Daniel Hayes walked in. Hayes was 55, broad-shouldered, silver at the temples, and careful with his expression in the way men become when they have spent years protecting institutions from embarrassment. Beside him walked Officer Caleb Turner, uniform pressed, jaw set, eyes scanning the room with the familiar confidence of someone who believed yesterday had already been swallowed by the town's silence. He had not seen Naomi yet. Caleb stopped near a row of deputies and accepted a paper cup of coffee from one of them. "Big morning," the deputy said. Caleb nodded. "Hope the new district attorney understands how things actually work around here." The words drifted across the hall just as Naomi stepped from the side corridor. Ruth Miller entered behind her, wearing her Sunday coat though it was not Sunday, hands clasped tight around her purse. Malik Johnson came in with his mother, shoulders stiff inside a button-down shirt that looked newly ironed. Naomi saw them and gave the smallest nod. Then she saw Caleb. His cup paused halfway to his mouth. At first, he only frowned, as if trying to place a face from an inconvenient dream. Then his eyes dropped to the folder in her hand, rose to her black suit, and finally landed on the brass nameplate being set on the front table by the clerk, Naomi Elise Carter, District Attorney, Marlow County. The color did not leave his face all at once. It withdrew slowly, like water pulling away from shore. Sheriff Hayes noticed the change and followed Caleb's stare. When he saw Naomi, his polite expression tightened, not with recognition alone, but calculation. Naomi walked past them without slowing. She did not smile at Caleb. She did not glare. She gave him the full dignity of being seen by the law he had mistaken for something he could pour soda over at midnight. At the front of the hall, Judge Eleanor Whitcomb waited beside the flag with a worn Bible on a small wooden stand. She had known Naomi as a teenager who argued too precisely for school competitions and asked questions adults did not always appreciate. Now she watched the grown woman approach with a look close to pride. "Ms. Carter," the judge said softly, "welcome home." Naomi placed one hand on the Bible and lifted the other. The room settled. Caleb stood near the back, trapped among uniforms that no longer felt like a shield. The oath began in a clear voice. Naomi repeated each line with steady breath. To support the Constitution, to faithfully discharge the duties of the office, to seek justice without fear or favor. The words filled the hall, old words, often repeated, sometimes forgotten, but not that morning. Malik listened with his eyes fixed on her. Ruth blinked hard, as if holding back years of things she wished she had said sooner. Sheriff Hayes watched Naomi's hand on the Bible and then the folder on the table, and something in his posture changed. He understood before Caleb did. The swearing-in was not the end of last night. It was the beginning of what last night had become. When the oath ended, the judge lowered the Bible, and a careful applause moved through the hall. Naomi waited until it faded. Then she turned toward the room, toward the deputies, the attorneys, the reporters, the mother holding Malik's arm, and the officer who had believed a diner full of witnesses would stay quiet. "Thank you," she said. "My first act in this office will be to request preservation of video evidence from Miller's Diner, written witness statements from those present last night, and an independent review of a detention involving a minor citizen of this county." The hall changed temperature. Caleb's coffee cup lowered slowly. Sheriff Hayes looked at the floor for 1 second, then back at Naomi. She continued, voice calm enough to make denial sound useless before it began. "Justice does not depend on who is recognized at first glance. It depends on what can be proven, what can be corrected, and who we are willing to protect when no one powerful is expected to be watching." No one moved. Outside, sunlight touched the courthouse steps where rain still darkened the stone. Inside, Naomi Carter stood at the front of the room, not louder than the badge, not harsher than the truth, but steady enough that both finally had to answer to her. The courthouse hallway did not erupt after Naomi spoke. It tightened. Conversation stopped in uneven pieces, first near the front where the reporters stood, then along the wall where the deputies had gathered, then near the security desk where an old ceiling fan clicked above the metal detector. Officer Caleb Turner stood with his coffee cup in one hand, no longer drinking, no longer joking, no longer surrounded by the easy protection of routine. Sheriff Daniel Hayes moved first, walking toward Naomi with the careful pace of a man trying to keep a public moment from becoming a public crisis. "District Attorney Carter," he said, his voice low enough to sound respectful and urgent at the same time. "Perhaps we should discuss this in my office." Naomi turned toward him, the fresh folder resting against her side. "We can discuss procedure in your office," she said. "The preservation request stands." Hayes glanced toward the reporters. "Of course. I am only suggesting we avoid unnecessary confusion." Naomi looked past him to Ruth Miller and Malik Johnson, then back to the sheriff. "Confusion is what happens when facts are handled quietly by people with something to lose." The sentence landed cleanly. Hayes did not answer right away. He was not a cruel man, at least not in the loud way Caleb had been. He had shaken hands at church fundraisers, delivered storm updates on local radio, and remembered the names of retired deputies' grandchildren. But he had also spent years calling certain complaints misunderstandings because misunderstandings required less paperwork than patterns. Naomi knew that kind of leadership. It did not always create the harm. Sometimes it simply taught harm where to hide. In the small conference room behind the clerk's office, the air smelled of old carpet, printer toner, and coffee burned from sitting too long on a warmer. Hayes closed the door, leaving Caleb outside with 2 deputies and the reporters still watching through the glass panel. Naomi remained standing. Hayes gestured toward a chair, but she did not take it. "Last night was unfortunate," he began. Naomi's eyes lifted. That word is not strong enough. Hayes exhaled. Officer Turner has served this county for 21 years. Then he has had 21 years to learn what probable cause means. The sheriff's jaw worked once. I am not defending poor judgment. Are you documenting it? He paused. That pause told Naomi more than an argument would have. She placed the evidence sleeve on the table. The stained pages inside had dried stiff at the edges, their corners buckled, the cola marks dark against the paper. This file contains my written statement, the names of witnesses present, the camera locations Ruth Miller identified, and a preliminary memo regarding the detention of Malik Johnson. I am requesting that your office preserve all radio logs, body camera status records, patrol vehicle location data, and prior complaints involving Officer Turner for independent review. Hayes looked at the file, then at her. Prior complaints? Yes. That expands the matter considerably. So does a pattern. The room went quiet except for the buzzing light overhead. Hayes looked older suddenly, not because the truth surprised him, but because it required effort he had hoped to avoid. District Attorney Carter, I understand your position. But coming in this hard on your first morning could damage your relationship with law enforcement. Naomi's expression did not change. If the relationship depends on silence, then it was already damaged. Outside the room, Caleb shifted near the glass, trying to see what was being said. Naomi noticed but did not look away from Hayes. I am not here to embarrass your department, she continued. I am here to make sure your department cannot embarrass justice and call it order. Hayes lowered his eyes to the evidence sleeve. His fingers tapped once against the table, then stopped. When he looked up again, the political calculation in his face had not disappeared, but something more serious had joined it. Consequence. I will issue the preservation order, he said. And Turner? Naomi asked. Hayes swallowed. Administrative leave pending review. The words were plain, but they moved through the room like a door unlocking. Naomi nodded once. Not satisfied. Not triumphant. Simply acknowledging that the first mechanism had begun to turn. When they stepped back into the hallway, Caleb's eyes went straight to the sheriff. Hayes did not soften it for him. Turner, you are relieved of patrol duty pending administrative review. Surrender your vehicle keys to Lieutenant Morris before leaving the building. Caleb's face tightened. Sheriff, you cannot be serious. Hayes looked toward the reporters, then toward Naomi, then back at the officer whose certainty was finally meeting procedure. I am. Malik stood beside his mother near the courthouse bench, watching with the stunned stillness of a teenager who had never seen power redirected on his behalf. Ruth Miller gripped her purse with both hands, tears gathering but not falling. Naomi caught Malik's eye. She did not smile broadly. She only gave him the smallest nod, the same kind her father used to give her when a hard thing had been done correctly, and there was still more work ahead. If this moment touched your heart, remember Naomi's strength. She did not use power to humiliate a man, she used it to protect the people his power had ignored. Caleb walked past her without speaking, his shoes striking the marble floor in short, controlled steps. The courthouse doors opened, and sunlight spilled across the hall. Naomi watched him leave, then turned back toward her new office, where unopened boxes waited, along with a county full of files, habits, and silences that had survived too long. Her first morning was not over. It had only found its purpose. By late afternoon, Naomi Carter's new office looked less like a place of power than a room interrupted by history. Cardboard boxes sat along the wall, half opened, filled with case binders, old budget reports, framed certificates still wrapped in brown paper, and law books that smelled faintly of dust and storage. The nameplate outside her door had been installed only an hour earlier, but already people slowed when they passed it. Some out of curiosity. Some out of hope. Some out of fear. Naomi stood at the window overlooking the courthouse square, watching the rainwater from the morning storm dry in uneven patches along the sidewalk. Marlowe County moved below her, as if nothing had shifted. Pickup trucks circled the square. A woman pushed a stroller past the war memorial. Two deputies crossed toward the annex, speaking low. But inside the courthouse, a new file had been opened, and that changed the weight of the air. On her desk lay three things: the stained diner file, Ruth Miller's signed witness statement, and Malik Johnson's handwritten account on lined notebook paper. His words were careful, almost too careful, as if he was still afraid that telling the truth incorrectly could get him in trouble. Naomi had read it twice. Then a third time. He had written, "I thought if I moved too fast, he would say I was reaching for something." Naomi closed her eyes when she reached that sentence. It did not describe a single night. It described a training that no child should have needed. A soft knock came at the door. "Come in," Naomi said. Ruth stepped inside first, holding her purse against her ribs like a shield. Malik and his mother followed. Malik's mother, Angela Johnson, wore a grocery store uniform under her coat, her face drawn with exhaustion and the kind of politeness people use when they are not sure whether a government office is safe. Naomi came around the desk instead of staying behind it. "Thank you for coming," she said. Angela looked at the chair, then at Naomi. "Are we in trouble?" The question was so immediate, so practiced, that the room seemed to go still around it. Naomi's voice softened. "No, Ms. Johnson. You are not in trouble. Your son is not in trouble. I asked you here because I wanted to explain what happens next, clearly and directly." Malik sat slowly, backpack between his feet. Ruth remained near the door until Naomi gestured gently toward another chair. Outside the window, the late sun broke through a strip of clouds and laid a pale line of gold across the floorboards. Naomi opened a clean folder, not the stained one, and placed it on the desk where everyone could see it. "The sheriff has placed Officer Turner on administrative leave pending review. My office has requested preservation of diner video, patrol records, radio logs, and prior complaint files. An outside investigator will be assigned, and your statements will be part of the record." Angela's hand tightened around Malik's shoulder. "Does that mean people are going to come after him?" Naomi did not rush the answer. False comfort was another kind of disrespect. "It means we will be careful. It means my office will document any retaliation concern. It means you will have a direct contact here, not a phone number that rings forever." She slid a card across the desk with her office line written in blue ink. Malik stared at it as if it were something heavier than paper. Ruth finally spoke, her voice rough. "I should have stopped it sooner." Naomi looked at her. "You can still help stop what comes next." Ruth nodded, tears bright but controlled. "I gave the camera footage to your investigator. I made a copy before anyone asked me not to." Naomi held her gaze for a long moment. "That was courage." Ruth shook her head. "No. It was late. Late courage still matters," Naomi said. The words settled over the room, not as forgiveness, but as a path. Malik looked up then. "What happens to him?" Naomi knew he meant Caleb. She folded her hands on the desk. "The review will decide what the evidence supports. I will not promise an outcome before the facts are complete." Malik looked disappointed for half a second, then thoughtful. "So even he gets a process?" Naomi's eyes warmed. "Especially him. If we only believe in rights when they belong to people we like, then we do not believe in rights. We believe in favors." The boy absorbed that slowly. Angela looked at Naomi with something like relief and grief at once. Ruth lowered her eyes. The courthouse clock struck 5 somewhere down the hall, each bell note spreading through the walls. Naomi gathered the stained pages and placed them beside the clean file, damage beside procedure, memory beside law. For the first time that day, the room felt less like an office being unpacked and more like a promise being assembled. After they left, Naomi stayed by the window until the square emptied into evening. She thought of her father's socket wrench holding down wet pages on the kitchen table. She thought of Caleb walking out under the eyes of reporters. She thought of Malik asking whether even the man who wronged him deserved a process. That was the question that separated justice from revenge. Outside, the last of the sunlight touched the courthouse steps. Naomi turned back to her desk, opened the first reform folder, and began writing the policy no one had bothered to write before. The next morning, Marlow County woke to a headline it could not fold away with the newspaper. The local station had not used Naomi's name in a flashy way, but the story was everywhere by breakfast: a minor detained at Miller's Diner, a newly sworn district attorney requesting independent review, an officer placed on administrative leave, and video evidence preserved before anyone could call the night a misunderstanding. At the sheriff's office, the air felt different. Deputies moved through the halls with careful faces. Phones rang more than usual. A receptionist lowered her voice every time a reporter called. In a small interview room with beige walls and a recorder on the table, Caleb Turner sat across from Sheriff Hayes and the outside investigator Naomi had requested, a retired state ethics attorney named Marjorie Bell. Caleb wore plain clothes instead of his uniform, and that alone seemed to have taken something from him. Without the badge visible on his chest, his anger had nowhere official to stand. Marjorie opened a folder and placed a printed still from the diner camera on the table. The image showed Malik by the counter, Naomi seated with her file, Ruth behind the register, and Caleb standing between them with the cup in his hand. Caleb looked at the image, then away. "I made a mistake," he said. "I was tired. The situation was tense." Marjorie did not write immediately. She looked at him over her glasses. "The wallet was found in the customer's booth." Caleb's jaw flexed. "I did not know that at the time. Did you ask to review the camera before detaining the teenager?" "No. Did you have a description that matched him?" "The complainant said a young man was near his table. The video shows he was clearing plates on the opposite side of the diner." Caleb leaned back, his face tightening. "You are reading calm footage after the fact. In the moment you make judgment calls." Sheriff Hayes stared at his hands. He had heard that sentence for years. He had used softer versions of it himself. This time, with the recorder running and Naomi's preservation order on file, the sentence did not stretch far enough to cover what happened. Across town, Naomi sat in her office listening to Ruth's recorded statement through small speakers on her desk. Ruth's voice trembled at first, then steadied as she described the cup, the words, the backpack, the way Malik had frozen. Naomi wrote notes in the margin, not with satisfaction, but with care. She understood that truth did not become stronger because it was painful. It became stronger when it was handled cleanly. Her assistant knocked and opened the door halfway. "District Attorney Carter, there is another family here asking about an old complaint involving Officer Turner." Naomi looked up slowly. "How old?" 3 years. Outside her office, the hallway held a black father in a work uniform, a Latina mother holding a folder, and an elderly white man gripping a cane, each with the same cautious expression people wear when they have carried a story too long and are afraid the office will send them away with a form. Naomi stood. The room seemed to shift around her, not because she had expected this, but because she had feared it. One file was becoming a door. Behind that door were other nights, other stops, other people who had decided silence was safer than being dismissed twice. Naomi stepped into the hallway and greeted them one by one, using their names after her assistant whispered them softly. "I cannot promise you an outcome today," she said, "but I can promise you this. If you give this office facts, this office will not bury them because they are inconvenient." The father's mouth tightened. The elderly man looked down. The mother pressed her folder closer to her chest, then held it out. By late afternoon, 3 more complaints had been logged for review. By evening, Naomi had requested an expanded audit of citizen detentions involving minors over the last 5 years. Sheriff Hayes received the request while standing alone in his office, the blinds half closed, the town square dimming outside. He read the memo twice. Then he walked to a locked cabinet that had not been opened in months and pulled out a box marked Informal Complaints. The cardboard was dusty. That dust felt like an accusation. He carried it himself to Naomi's office. When she opened the door, he stood there with the box in both hands, looking less like a sheriff defending his department, and more like a man finally admitting what defense had cost. "These should have been reviewed before," he said, Naomi took the box from him carefully. Then we review them now. Hayes nodded, but his eyes were heavy. Turner asked if this is personal. Naomi looked at the box, then back at him. It became public the moment he made it public. It became official the moment the evidence showed a pattern. Personal would have been easy. Hayes absorbed that, then stepped away. Naomi placed the box on her desk beside the stained diner file. Outside, the courthouse settled into evening, its old walls holding the low hum of fluorescent lights and the first honest movement of accountability. She opened the top complaint and began reading. No applause. No raised voice. Just paper, witness names, dates, and the quiet sound of a system being asked, at last, to tell the truth about itself. A week later, the public meeting was held in the same courthouse hall where Naomi had taken her oath. This time, the room was fuller. Residents stood along the walls, reporters lined the back with cameras lowered out of respect for the families who had come to speak, and deputies sat in the front row with faces that ranged from defensive to ashamed. Ruth Miller sat beside Malik Johnson and his mother, hands folded tightly over a tissue she had not used. Sheriff Hayes stood near the side entrance, uniform pressed, shoulders squared, but the certainty he once carried had been replaced by something heavier and more honest. Naomi entered without ceremony, wearing a dark green suit and carrying 3 folders. One held the completed preliminary findings from Marjorie Bell. One held the policy reforms drafted by Naomi's office. The last was the stained file from Miller's Diner, preserved in a clear sleeve, its brown edges curled and stiff, a reminder that the first evidence had arrived wet, sticky, and publicly dismissed. Officer Caleb Turner was not in uniform. He sat near the front with his attorney, hands clasped, jaw tight, eyes fixed on the table in front of him. When Naomi passed, he did not look up. Maybe shame had finally found him. Maybe fear had. Naomi did not need to know which one. She placed the folders on the table and turned to face the room. This review began with one incident, she said, her voice clear but not loud. It did not end there. The hall held still. She explained the findings without drama, because drama was not necessary when the facts were already heavy. The diner video showed Malik had not approached the tourist's booth. The wallet had been recovered where the tourist left it. Officer Turner had not documented legal grounds for detaining Malik. Body camera activation records were incomplete. Prior informal complaints showed a pattern of unnecessary stops, especially involving young Black and Latino residents, several of them minors. Naomi did not call Caleb names. She did not turn the meeting into a spectacle. She let the record do what the town had avoided doing for years. It stood up. Sheriff Hayes stepped forward when she finished and faced the room. The old instinct to protect the department moved across his face, but this time he did not follow it. These complaints should have been reviewed when they were made, he said. They were not. That failure belongs to leadership, including me. A low sound moved through the audience, not applause, not anger, something closer to breath finally released. Caleb's attorney whispered to him, but Caleb raised one hand slightly, asking him to stop. Slowly he stood. The room tightened again. Naomi watched him carefully, ready to interrupt if he turned the moment toward excuse. Caleb looked first at Sheriff Hayes, then at Malik. His voice came rough. I was wrong. Malik did not move. Caleb swallowed. I treated you like suspicion was enough. It was not. I treated Ms. Carter like she had to prove she belonged before I had to respect her. That was wrong. His eyes flicked toward Naomi, then away. An apology does not fix it. I know that. Naomi held the silence after his words, because sometimes a room needed to learn that apology was not the end of consequence. Officer Turner has waived his right to contest administrative suspension during the full investigation, she said. The State Review Board will receive these findings. My office will not prosecute cases that depend on unsupported stops or incomplete records without independent verification. Then she opened the second folder. Beginning this month, Marlow County will require documented probable cause review for all juvenile detentions, automatic preservation of body camera and patrol data after citizen complaints, quarterly public reporting, and mandatory independent review when an officer is accused of misconduct involving a minor. Ruth covered her mouth. Angela Johnson lowered her head. Malik stared at the floor, but his shoulders were different now, not relaxed, exactly, but no longer folded around fear. Naomi looked at him for a moment and remembered his question in her office. So even he gets a process? Yes. And so did Malik. So did every person in the box of complaints that had waited too long in a locked cabinet. After the meeting, people did not rush to leave. They formed small clusters under the courthouse lights, speaking quietly, as if the truth had made the building unfamiliar. Caleb walked out through a side door with his attorney, not chased, not shouted down, simply followed by the consequences he had avoided for years. Sheriff Hayes stayed behind near the front bench. "You could have made that much harder on him," he said. Naomi gathered the stained file into her bag. "I did not make it easy." "No," Hayes said. "You made it official." Naomi looked toward the benches where Malik was standing with Ruth and his mother. A reporter tried to approach him, but Ruth stepped between them with surprising firmness, and Angela guided her son toward the door. Naomi almost smiled. Late courage still mattered. Outside, the afternoon sun touched the courthouse columns, and the rain from days before was gone, leaving the stone clean but not new. Naomi stepped onto the top stair and watched the town square move below her. Cars passed. A child crossed the lawn with a red backpack. The diner sign glowed faintly down the street. Justice had not healed the town in a week. It had only refused to look away. But sometimes refusing to look away was the first honest repair. 3 weeks later, Miller's Diner opened before dawn with the same bell over the door, the same red stools along the counter, and the same old coffee machine breathing steam into the quiet. But the room did not feel the same. A small notice near the register now explained customer rights during police questioning in plain language. A new camera above the pie case blinked with a steady green light. Behind the counter, Ruth Miller moved with a steadier spine, pouring coffee for the road crew in booth 2 and placing a plate of eggs in front of an elderly man who had been coming there since before Naomi was born. Malik Johnson worked the morning shift before school, wiping down menus, refilling napkin holders, and laughing once when Ruth corrected the way he stacked cups. There was still caution in him, still a trace of that night in the way his eyes moved when a patrol car passed outside, but there was something else now too. Not innocence returned. Something more durable. The knowledge that the truth had not disappeared when he needed it. At 7:10, Naomi Carter stepped through the door in a charcoal coat, carrying a leather folder, and wearing no expression that asked for attention. The diner quieted for half a breath, then continued. That was how she wanted it. Not applause. Not celebration. Just people learning that justice could walk into an ordinary room and sit at the counter without turning itself into a parade. Ruth poured coffee before Naomi asked and set it beside the same seat where the stained file had once been ruined. Fresh cup, Ruth said. No charge. Naomi looked at her over the steam. Ruth. Fine, Ruth said, sliding a check beside it. Half price for public service. Naomi almost smiled. Malik came over with the coffee pot, shoulders straighter than before. Good morning, District Attorney Carter. Good morning, Malik. He hesitated, then reached into his apron pocket and pulled out a folded letter. The internship office sent this. They said I start shadowing next month. Naomi unfolded the page carefully. Marlow County District Attorney Youth Civic Internship Program. Malik Johnson accepted. Her eyes softened. You earned this. Malik looked down, embarrassed but proud. I just wrote what happened. Sometimes that is where justice starts. Outside the window, a patrol car rolled slowly past the diner and continued down Main Street. No one at the counter stiffened the way they might have before. Not because every fear had vanished, but because a town had seen that a badge could be questioned, that a file could be opened, that silence was no longer the safest language. Caleb Turner remained suspended while the state review continued. Several old cases had been flagged for review. Sheriff Hayes had begun weekly public reporting, awkwardly at first, then with the tired seriousness of a man learning that transparency was not an attack on duty but a requirement of it. Naomi opened her leather folder and took out the first draft of the Citizen Detention Reform Policy, the edges marked with notes from Angela Johnson, Ruth Miller, 2 defense attorneys, 3 deputies, and a retired judge who had written in the margin, "Make the language clearer for parents." Naomi liked that note best. Law that ordinary people could not understand had a way of protecting only the people trained to speak it. The diner door opened again, bringing in a cool ribbon of morning air. Sheriff Hayes entered, removed his hat, and paused when he saw Naomi. For a moment, the room watched them both. He walked to the counter and placed a slim envelope beside her coffee. "The department signed the preservation protocol this morning," he said. "All supervisors." Naomi picked up the envelope but did not open it yet. "And the juvenile stop policy?" Hayes nodded. "Draft goes to county commissioners Friday. Public comment before adoption." Ruth crossed her arms behind the counter, listening. Malik pretended to wipe the same spot twice. Naomi looked at Hayes, searching his face for performance and finding, instead, fatigue and a beginning. "Thank you, Sheriff." He gave a small nod. "Do not thank me yet. Make sure we follow it." Naomi held his gaze. "I will." Hayes left with the coffee to go, and the diners slowly returned to the music of plates, forks, low conversation, and rainwater dripping from the awning outside, though the sky had already cleared. Naomi turned back to her draft and began writing in the margin. The morning sun broke through the clouds and touched the window, turning the glass gold around the red letters of Miller's sign. In that light, the counter looked ordinary again, but not unchanged. The place where Caleb had tried to make her small now held a policy draft, a young man's acceptance letter, a witness who had learned to speak, and a cup of coffee cooling beside the hand of the woman who had refused to confuse revenge with justice. Naomi signed the bottom of the page, not as a final victory, but as the next step. Then she capped her pen, listened to the quiet, and let the town breathe.